Hey guys, this is your video lecture on Indigenous Peoples Day. Some people know it as Columbus Day. Miss Campbell grew up celebrating Christopher Columbus, and in 2017, a lot of people's ideas changed about Columbus Day and thought that the natives should be celebrated, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. But before we can talk about this day, we need to learn a little bit about Christopher Columbus. He was an explorer, and he had this wonderful idea that he was going to go on a trip, and he was going to sail all the way to Asia. Well, if you look at a globe, you will see that this is not possible. So he thought that if he went from, Spain west across the Atlantic Ocean, that he was going to hit Asia. Well, North America is in the way. They didn't know that North America was there. So his trip was miscalculated from the beginning. He relied on the writings of two people, Marco Polo and a geographer named Paolo Toscanelli. They were wrong about the size of Asia. They thought Asia was much larger than it was. And at this time, they underestimated the size of the Earth. They thought that the Earth was 2/3 as large as it actually is. And so he said, well, I'm going to travel and I'm going to do this. But nobody wanted to pay for his trip because it was very expensive to have all of the workers and sailors and supplies that you need for that long of a trip. So he went to Spain's rulers, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and they liked his plan because Columbus told them about all of the riches and all of the wealth that came from the Asian trade. So they wanted a piece of that money pie. Also, the Queen Isabella was a very strong Catholic, and so she thought, oh, well, if he's going to go to Asia, then he can spread Christianity, and that's like two birds with one stone. But they thought, when he told them the amount of money that he wanted to travel, they were like, no way. But then they changed their mind, and they sent a horseback. After he had left, they sent a rider on horseback to bring him back and say, okay, we'll fund your trip. So he had a really difficult time finding a crew to go with him. And so about 90 people with 3 ships and enough food for a year, fresh water, firewood, and other necessities were packed up, and they set sail to go find Asia. So the men started to lose confidence in Columbus's ability to navigate, and so they kept sailing, and they said, okay, after 3 more days, if we do not see land, we're going to turn around. And then 2 days later, they see land, right? So they've reached the Americas. They reached North America, thinking they were in Asia. And so when they get there, they run into these native tribes. And at first, the native tribe was like, yeah, we can trade, we can share goods. And then Columbus set sail back to Spain to let the king and queen know that, hey, we found Asia and we're doing trade. And he left 39 men behind. But once Columbus left, those 39 men really angered the native tribe that they had run into. And so the Taino tribe killed the men, the 39 men. So when Columbus returned, he was just flabbergasted that they had, taken out his men. And so when he got there, he expected gold because he noticed that some of the tribal members were wearing gold jewelry. And so it turns out that Columbus was not as nice of a guy that he was always painted to be. Miss Cantwell, when she was in school, learned that he discovered the Americas, and there were 3 boats, and we just did all these projects to celebrate him. But when Columbus returned, he wanted the gold and he got very greedy. And so he enslaved a lot of the tribal members who were there. And if they didn't give them tribute, which means to pay money or give goods in return for, what's the word I'm looking for loyalty, for being taken care of. And so he in his diaries, he wrote about cutting the hands off of people who didn't give him enough gold. He enslaved people, even children, and he just wasn't really a nice guy. So enter Indigenous Peoples Day. So many people feel that he is not to be celebrated, and I know you guys know there's a lot of things going on in our country today where people are standing up and they're rising up for justice, and they're saying, hey, these natives were treated so poorly. Why are we celebrating this guy who treated them atrociously? So in 2017, the many laws changed in cities and states that said, hey, let's not celebrate Columbus. Let's celebrate the native people who were already here. And so it celebrates the accomplishments and the culture and the history of the natives who already lived here in the Americas. So the natives, as you guys know, and we learned at the beginning of school, that they came all the way from Asia and all the way down into North America and spread all the way to South America. So the native people were already here. Christopher Columbus did not discover the Americas. There were already people living here for hundreds of years. And the Europeans that arrived here first were from Norway, the Vikings, again, Miss Cantwell's people. So Christopher Columbus wasn't really the first European to set foot in the Americas. So people are finding, let's celebrate the accomplishments and everything that the natives went through instead of a man who treated them so poorly and enslaved them and took them back to Europe and, injured them tremendously. And also when the Europeans came, we will learn about this as we get through the book, they also brought many different foods that we didn't have, which is good. Miss Cantwell needs her coffee. We wouldn't have coffee if the Europeans hadn't shown up. But they also brought disease. They brought the flu. They brought smallpox. So once the Europeans started landing in the Americas, the Native Americans could not handle the illnesses and the diseases that were brought over. And so I need you guys to know that about 90% of the Native American population was taken out because of European explorers coming over and exposing the natives to these diseases. So Miss Cantwell likes to ponder and think about, if the Europeans hadn't come over here, I bet we would have a really large population of Native Americans throughout the entire country. But because their populations were hit so hard, it was just depleted. And as people moved in and as the colonizers moved in, it was just very detrimental to the Native American society. And so that is the story of Columbus and Indigenous Peoples Day. I understand that there's some people who are set in their ways and they still call it Columbus Day. They may not understand how poorly the natives were treated because, again, when Miss Cantwell was in school, they didn't talk to us about that. They didn't teach us about how mean he was. But he kept diaries, and so as people read diaries, which is a primary source, it happened from when he was writing them and he was there. There's some really not so nice things that Columbus did. So just be aware that there's two sides to the story. I like that we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day because I think that the Native American communities deserve to be celebrated, and their culture. They have a beautiful culture and a beautiful way of life. So I think that is to be celebrated, as is everyone's culture and everyone's life. So this is the end of your lecture. Now you get to go to your Google Doc, and I want you to tell me your thoughts on, do you think that we should celebrate Christopher Columbus? Because he did some good. He brought over goods and things that we didn't have before. We have some fruits, some vegetables, and coffee. So I want you guys to just think really deeply about, should both sides be celebrated, or should we just stick with Indigenous Peoples Day, or should we just stick with Columbus Day? And I want you to tell me why. And I want you to dig deep and think about how each person's culture and origin should be celebrated. But we shouldn't, what's the word I'm looking for? We shouldn't celebrate the atrocities that are done to people out of greed. So go get your assignment done, and that's the end of this lecture.